The Book of Enoch, part of the Dead Sea Scrolls, stands as the oldest known apocalyptic writing in history. Even though it revolves around a biblical figure mentioned in both the Old and New Testaments, it wasn't meant to be included in the official canon of Christianity and Judaism. To uncover who Enoch was and why his experiences were significant enough to be recorded for history, let's start with the official version of the Bible. However, when you dive into the Holy Scriptures of Christianity, you quickly realize that information about Enoch is quite sparse. In the Old Testament, Enoch gets only a brief mention in Genesis. It tells us that he's the son of Jared, who in turn is descended from Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve. Enoch's extraordinary nature becomes apparent when we look at his age. According to the text, he lived for nearly 365 years. But what's even more astonishing is the longevity of Enoch's descendants. Among them, Methuselah stands out, reputedly living close to 1,000 years. He's famously known as the forefather before the flood. The New Testament expands on the story of Enoch a bit further. The Epistle to the Hebrews highlights that Enoch was favored by God and was taken up because of his unwavering faith. But what does this entail? Essentially, it means that Enoch was granted entry into the kingdom of heaven without experiencing death. This marks the end of the official biblical account of Enoch. To delve deeper into the background of this intriguing figure and explore the supernatural experiences attributed to him, we must turn to other writings, the apocryphal Enoch books and scrolls. Between 1947 and 1956, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls sent shockwaves through the study of the Hebrew Bible. These ancient scrolls, found in various caves, primarily contain texts of religious significance. Among the vast archaeological treasure was a significant collection that would later be recognized as the Ethiopian Book of Enoch. What makes this discovery remarkable is that it stands as the oldest known apocalyptic writing in history. Scholars analyzing these texts concluded that the Book of Enoch was likely composed as early as the 3rd century BC. To put this in perspective, the renowned Book of Revelation in the New Testament is dated to around 95 AD. The reason why the comprehensive collection of the Enoch story is often referred to as the Ethiopian Book is because the complete work has been preserved primarily in the ancient Ethiopian language. This is closely tied to the fact that the Book of Enoch holds a central place within the Ethiopian Church, which sets it apart from other Jewish and Christian communities worldwide. Nowhere else has the work been officially included in the canon. But why is this the case? Could it be that the scriptures contain hidden knowledge that not only challenges our religious beliefs but also our understanding of the world? Let's delve deeper. Enoch's ascension, as previously mentioned, depicts him being taken into heaven by God while still alive. However, the Bible leaves you wondering about the specifics of this ascent into the kingdom of heaven. The Ethiopian Book of Enoch sheds more light on this matter. It suggests that Enoch was granted insight into ancient divine and heavenly mysteries during his rapture. Furthermore, the fall of the angels is detailed in this ancient collection of scriptures. To grasp this, let's explore a specific text within the collection titled the Book of the Watchers. According to tradition, the angel Semyaza leads a group of other celestial beings in a decision to descend to earth. Their objective? To cohabit with human women and sire offspring. From this union between earthly and heavenly beings, ferocious giants emerge, throwing the world into turmoil and drawing the wrath of God. In response, the Lord banishes the angels from paradise and decrees their ultimate fate, to be cast into a lake of blazing flames on the day of judgment, eradicating the giants from the earth. Faced with their impending doom, The fallen angels plead for mercy, but God remains resolute. This is where Enoch steps in. Tasked with delivering God's severe judgment to the fallen angels, Enoch is visited by two angels and then escorted to heaven during his ascent. Along the way, he gains profound insights into the divine realm. Though the term divine realm might suggest a single heavenly domain, it's rumored that there are 7 distinct levels of heaven, each possibly housing different entities. This concept, found in the Book of Enoch, diverges from other religious texts and might explain why some religions exclude it from the canon Bible. Unlike other books in the Hebrew Bible, which mention only one heaven, Enoch describes a hierarchy of heavens. In this cosmology, the first heaven contains the clouds and stars, while the second is the realm where the fallen angels await judgment. The third heaven is akin to the biblical paradise, where the souls of the righteous reside, but it also includes a portion for sinners' punishment. Beyond the sun, the moon, and formidable guardians lies the 7th and highest heaven where God's throne resides, with only a select few archangels permitted to dwell beside the Lord of all creation. The rigorous process of selecting canonical texts aimed to preserve the integrity and coherence of the Bible's message, ensuring that it remained a reliable guide for Christian faith and practice. Regarding the Book of Enoch, it appears to have been created under questionable circumstances. Its narrative diverges significantly from the other 66 books of the Bible, and there's a lack of ancient translations, hinting at a more modern origin, while fragments in Aramaic have been discovered, indicating some awareness of the book among ancient Jews and certain Christians. There's no evidence that it underwent the rigorous scrutiny and verification process typical of other biblical texts by first-century Christians. Enthusiasts of Enoch and proponents of theories like pre-astronautics offer various reasons why they believe the Book of Enoch was excluded from the Bible. However, when viewed through a strictly historical lens, it becomes apparent that the Book of Enoch doesn't fit within the established framework of biblical canon. The theory that the Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible as part of a worldwide conspiracy, and that its content actually narrates a tale of alien abduction, is indeed quite sensational. This interpretation stems from the paradigm of pre-astronautics, which suggests that ancient civilizations were visited by extraterrestrial beings. In this narrative, the entities described in the Book of Enoch as descending to Earth and intermingling with humans are not seen as divine beings, but rather as aliens. The figure traditionally understood as God is reinterpreted as the leader of these extraterrestrial beings, rather than the heavenly creator. Enoch's purported ascension to paradise is then seen not as a journey to heaven, but as a classic example of alien abduction. From this perspective, the events Enoch witnesses during his journey may be reinterpreted through the lens of encounters with advanced extraterrestrial technology and beings. This theory offers a fascinating, if speculative, alternative to conventional religious interpretations of the Book of Enoch. However, it's important to note that it diverges significantly from mainstream religious beliefs and interpretations of biblical texts. The idea that extraterrestrial intelligences have openly interacted with humanity in the past, being worshipped as heavenly beings, is a compelling concept within the realm of pre-astronautics. Some proponents of this theory believe that another visit from these beings is imminent, as they continuously observe our species. With our current technological advancements, especially in destructive capabilities like atomic bombs, they may perceive humanity as being on the brink of self-destruction. Thus, according to pre-astronauts, these unseen observers might intervene to guide us back on the right path. Babylon, throughout history, has been both revered and shrouded in mystery. The city, situated along the Euphrates River approximately 50 miles south of present-day Baghdad, served as the capital of the Babylonian Empire. While much of its history remains enigmatic, ancient texts and archaeological findings provide insights into its significance. The first recorded mention of Babylon dates back to a clay tablet from the time of Sargon of Akkad, around 2334 2279 BC. As a thriving metropolis, Babylon played a pivotal role in ancient Mesopotamia, known for its architectural wonders, cultural achievements, and strategic importance. However, theories abound regarding the ultimate downfall of this illustrious city, with biblical texts and historical documents offering glimpses into its fate. The decline of Babylon marked the end of an era, with its original name fading into obscurity by the 10th century AD. Over time, the once thriving city fell into decline, eventually becoming little more than a deserted area. It's thought that the last inhabitants, who settled in a small village in the vicinity, were eventually driven out, leading to the final disappearance of Babylon. During its zenith, Babylon stood as the epitome of urban civilization, boasting unparalleled popularity and population. Estimates suggest that it may have been the most populous city globally, with a staggering population exceeding 200,000 inhabitants, a remarkable feat for its time. The city's vast expanse, covering approximately 2,200 acres of land, underscored its grandeur and significance in ancient Mesopotamia. Indeed, while Babylon's glory days have long passed, traces of its former splendor endure as silent witnesses to its illustrious past. Despite facing numerous raids and the ravages of time, some remnants of the city still stand today, albeit as mere echoes of its former magnificence. Visitors to the region can explore these archaeological sites, where a few walls and structures offer glimpses into Babylon's ancient grandeur. These remnants provide valuable insights into what life might have been like in one of the earliest and most influential human civilizations in history. Even in the present day, these locations continue to attract tourists from around the world, offering a poignant connection to the distant past and a chance to marvel at the achievements of one of humanity's greatest civilizations. Herodotus, the renowned Greek historian, was astounded by the grandeur and uniqueness of Babylon when he beheld it with his own eyes. He marveled at its immense size and radiant beauty, noting that it surpassed any other city in the world. However, the greatness of Babylon did not emerge overnight. Its transformation into a cosmopolitan hub began in the 3rd millennium BC, laying the foundation for the magnificent city that would captivate Herodotus centuries later. Initially, Babylon was a humble settlement located approximately 90 kilometers south of modern-day Baghdad, far removed from the bustling metropolis it would eventually become. Babylon finally experienced its first heyday under the reign of King Hammurabi. He was the 6th ruler of the First Babylonian dynasty and directed the fortunes of the empire between 1792 and 1750 BC. The long reign of the king was characterized above all by a large expansion policy. Hammurabi not only succeeded in conquering numerous areas, but also in overthrowing the Assyrian king Ish-din and obliging his son to pay high tributes. Through all of these successes, Babylon eventually grew into a major power in Mesopotamia. King Hammurabi reorganized the city's administration, improved agriculture, and initiated monumental building projects, such as the erection of impressive temples dedicated to the gods. While Hammurabi's reign was undoubtedly characterized by ambitious plans for conquest, according to his records, his main goal was to improve the lives of his subjects in every imaginable area. When the day finally came when the king died, Babylon formed the beating heart of a mighty empire that ruled virtually all of Mesopotamia. However, the successors of Hammurabi would not be allowed to uphold the political legacy of their predecessors. So it was that Babylonia's first heyday was relatively short-lived. Eventually, the first Babylonian Empire fell into the hands of various foreign rulers, including the Hittites, the Cites, and the Assyrians. Following the death of the Assyrian ruler Ashurbanipal, the Neo-Assyrian Empire plunged into a period of tumultuous chaos. A bitter civil war erupted within the empire's borders, further weakening its stability. Amidst this turmoil, opportunistic figures like the Chilan chief Na'ap-Palazar saw a chance to seize power for themselves. Na'ap-Palazar forged alliances with other ethnic groups, leveraging the chaos to his advantage. Through this coalition, they eventually succeeded in overthrowing the Neo-Assyrian Empire. This unexpected turn of events realized Na'ap-Palazar's ambition as he ascended to the throne of the newly established Neo-Babylonian Empire in 605 BC. Upon his death, the first king of the reformed Babylon bequeathed his fortified capital and vast wealth to his son, Nebuchadnezzar II. For Nebuchadnezzar, it became a mission to uphold his father's legacy and elevate Babylonia to the summit of ancient society, a goal he would indeed achieve. The Tower of Babel. During the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, the Neo-Babylonian Empire controlled Assyria and much of Asia Minor, northern Arabia, Israel, and Phoenicia. The plans that Nebuchadnezzar II put into action during his reign deeply enshrined the king in historical memory. Among other things, the ruler had the Jews expelled from Babylon, conquered the city of Jerusalem, and had two important buildings built within the borders of the flourishing capital: the so-called Ishtar Gate and the legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon. However, whether it really was Nebuchadnezzar who had this ancient wonder of the world built has always been hotly debated among experts. The assumption that Nebuchadnezzar also ordered the legendary Tower of Babel to be built is no less controversial. This is one of the most famous biblical stories in the Old Testament. From a theological point of view, this oversized construction project is interpreted as an attempt by mankind to equate himself with God. According to biblical text, the rumor claims that the Babylonians built the infamous Tower of Babel so that they could reach heaven for themselves rather than needing to follow God's rule. For all the obvious reasons, God didn't take kindly to this new idea, and, in a sense, cursed the tower. Up until this point, God had been giving rules to the people of Babylon and had been helping them along the way during the construction of the city. However, they didn't like the rules and guidelines that had been passed down. Thus, they decided to take matters into their own hands. However, since the Lord in heaven didn't like this arrogance and overconfidence of the people, he brought the tower construction to a standstill. And not by creating a great natural disaster, but by creating insurmountable confusion in the ranks of the population. This happened when God confused the language of the people so that the citizens could no longer communicate with each other and finally scattered them over the most diverse regions of the world. According to the Old Testament story, some experts relate this biblical representation to the so-called Etani. This was a ziggurat or stepped temple tower, the remains of which were recovered in the early 20th century. To put it simply, God made it so that every construction worker who was building the tower suddenly and unexpectedly spoke a different language. As a result, none of the workers could understand what the other workers were saying. This meant that communication came to a screeching halt as the people could no longer continue with their work. As soon as this took place, the workers took their families, who presumably spoke the same language as their working men, and moved to different parts of the world where they spread their languages with the natives. According to biblical texts, this is how the various languages of the world came to be. Over time, these languages continued to evolve and branch off into the many different languages that are spoken across the globe. As we obviously have come to know, many additional languages would pop up in the following years. But this was the beginning of how the world came to speak the countless languages that are shared around the world. The last king, the rulers who came to power after Nebuchadnezzar II, didn't display the skill of their successful predecessor. In the first decade after the king's death, the Neo-Babylonian Empire had 4 different rulers. The last king to rule the empire until its fall was Nabonidus. The ruler of Assyrian descent saw himself as the heir of Assyria, better known as the empire that once lost its political autonomy due to defeat by the Babylonians. Because of Nabonidus striving to restore ancient architectural and cultural traditions during his 17-year reign, he's known in retrospect as the archaeologist king. However, the king's projects met with little approval from the population. Accordingly, Nabonidus was extremely unpopular, especially among the priests of Marduk. The background to this was that the rulers suppressed the followers of the Babylonian god Marduk and instead placed the moon god Sin at the center of religious worship. Added to this was the fact that the reign of Nabonidus was repeatedly characterized by lengthy periods of absence. Why the king often left his capital for months is still the subject of heated debates. The attempts to explain this range from research trips to illnesses to full-blown bouts of madness. To put it more plainly, the people weren't satisfied with their new ruler, and thus, the city fell into utter chaos as they had no one to guide them when the ruler was in his office and actually taking control of the city. They didn't feel that they could trust him as he was bound to disappear for a long period of time once again, at any given moment. The decline of Babylon and the fall of the Neo-Babylonian Empire unfolded against the backdrop of increasing Persian power in the east, spearheaded by Cyrus II. In 549 BC, the Persians dealt a decisive blow to the Lydians, a military defeat that reverberated throughout the region and had dire consequences for Babylonia. With the Persians encroaching, Babylon found itself surrounded by the burgeoning Persian Empire. Inevitably, Babylonia succumbed to the might of the Persians, marking the end of Babylon's reign as the capital of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. The exact circumstances of Babylon's fall remain elusive as ancient accounts vary. Some sources, such as Herodotus and Xenophon, describe a siege leading to Babylon's downfall, while others suggest that the Babylonians surrendered their city to the Persians without resistance. Despite the uncertainty surrounding Babylon's defeat, the Persian victory ushered in a period of significant upheaval. Babylonia was absorbed into the Persian Empire as a vital province, with Aramaic declared as the official language, though Akkadian remained preferred by local scholars. Moreover, Cyrus II's policy included allowing the Jews, who had been exiled from Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar II, to return to their homeland, marking a significant turning point in their history. Speaking of Nebuchadnezzar II, although he's generally regarded as the most successful king of Babylonia, according to an Old Testament account, he's said to have already known about the fall of the empire during his reign. A statue made of gold, silver, and bronze appeared to the ruler in a dream. The figure was then crushed by a huge rock, which then turned into a gigantic mountain range that covered the entire globe. The prophet Daniel interpreted this cryptic dream to mean that the statue represented 4 successive kingdoms, including the Babylonian Empire, all of which would be destroyed by God. But even apart from religious interpretations, the further history of the defeated Babylon seems extremely interesting. The Persian province quickly developed into an important scientific location where the most diverse researchers from all over the world met to expand their general knowledge. In the 5th century BC, the astronomers living there calculated the solar year for the first time. and a few decades later created the first horoscope in history. In the year 333 BC, finally, Alexander the Great invaded Babylonia. The victorious Greeks accepted the culture of the residents and added some of their own traditions and achievements to it. After the death of Alexander the Great, his divided army leaders fought each other, and the entire area fell victim to raids and devastation. After the Seleucids were driven out of the area, the Parthians took over in the late 2nd century BC, thus leading to the ultimate conclusion of this once great city. According to the New Testament, one day there will appear a devilish person who takes it upon himself to challenge the teachings of Jesus Christ and deceive the believers, the Antichrist. Although this very figure will play an important role in the biblical end times, the Holy Scriptures use the term Antichrist very sparingly. In fact, this name is only used in the epistles of John. The Antichrist, as we mentioned at the beginning in the Bible, only occurs in the letters of John. However, some terms can be found in the 4 Gospels that correspond to the meaning of this term. In detail, we come across expressions like false teachers, false apostles, and false prophets. And Jesus also predicted at the time that one day people would appear who would claim to have been sent down to earth to bring divine messages to mankind. The Gospel of Mark says, "If someone that then says to you, look, here's the Messiah," or "Look, there he is, don't believe it. For many a false Messiah and many a false prophet will arise, and they'll perform signs and wonders if possible to mislead the elect." As a rule, these false prophets are regarded as human opponents of Jesus who are sent by the devil to destroy and to foe humanity. In the first letter of John, it's written that the appearance of many antichrists will usher in the last hour. These false prophets will identify themselves by denying Jesus' identity as the Son of God. Well, we usually understand a single devilish figure when we refer to the ominous Antichrist. In early Christianity, it sometimes describes a whole group of the concept of false teachers, and the potential implications it holds for the future is indeed a matter of interpretation and speculation. It could imply the rise of cult leaders or individuals who distort the teachings of Christ, leading others astray from the true faith. Alternatively, it may signify a broader rejection of Christ and his divinity by a significant portion of humanity. Regardless of the specifics, such a scenario is foreboding and suggests a dark period for humanity. In contrast, the Book of Revelation, the apocalyptic finale of the New Testament, provides a different perspective on the end times. As the sole prophetic book in the New Testament, Revelation offers a detailed account of the events leading to the end of the world. This visionary text provides a rich tapestry of symbols and allegories depicting cosmic battles, divine judgments, and the eventual triumph of good over evil. When the Lamb, meaning Jesus Christ, opens the mystical 7 seals of the book, the earth will be thrown into utter chaos. After the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse proclaimed the coming calamity, 7 angels will blow 7 trumpets. As a result, elemental catastrophes will take place that will cost countless lives, including a rain of fire and blood, the falling of a gigantic burning mountain, and the poisoning of the adversaries of Jesus Christ. In addition to animal figures, there's also a large dragon, which according to Babylonian mythology embodies Satan. So, we find here once again an opponent of God who incites people to disobedience to the Creator of the world. The second beast also has great parallels to the classic Antichrist. This beast calls itself a prophet and calls Christians to turn away from God and instead worship the first beast form. However, the name of this idol which people are to worship from now on is 6666. That sequence of numbers still has great significance in the occult world and is typically associated with Satanism because of its insidious qualities. The second beast figure of the Book of Revelation is often equated with the Antichrist mentioned in the letters of John. Ultimately, the warriors of God will succeed in defeating the devil, the Antichrist, and the first beast and throwing them into a lake of burning brimstone. Then the last judgment will be held, at which point each person will be judged according to their deeds and assigned to either hell or paradise. Then God will create a new heaven and a new earth and dwell. Alongside his people on the trail of the Antichrist over the course of the centuries, the figure of the Antichrist was to move more and more to the center of Christian interest. Scholars always tried to interpret the form of the devilish adversary and to make statements about his arrival. So it didn't take long before the mystical Antichrist was supposed to find his way into reality. According to this, some Roman emperors such as Titus, Nero, and Deus were equated with the false prophet of the Bible. In the 7th century, the Islamic conquerors were also credited with acting on behalf of the demonic Antichrist. Take, for example, a segment from the 4th chapter of 1 John. It reads, "Beloved, do not trust every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they belong to God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. This is how you can know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges Jesus Christ comes in the flesh belongs to God, and every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus does not belong to God." This passage suggests that there are many false prophets, and we know the false prophet is synonymous with Antichrist. The passage also suggests that the Antichrist is more of a spirit than a physical being, and that the spirit may take on many shapes, dwell in many people, and doesn't belong to God in any way, suggesting it was sent by the devil himself. With this in mind, you've probably already encountered the Antichrist spirit at some point in your life. You simply didn't realize it. This passage concludes with a very chilling statement, reading, "This is the spirit of the Antichrist, that as you heard is to come, but in fact is already in the world." This passage provides us with confirmation that the Antichrist is already among us. The Antichrist in National Socialism. No matter how far we turn the wheel of time, the figure of Antichrist remains relevant. In the 1520s, Martin Luther came to believe that the entire papacy was the Antichrist. The author of the Reformation lasted until his death in 1546. It would go beyond the scope of our video to list all the historical personalities and groups who were once suspected of being false prophets. Therefore, we're going to jump back in time and go to the beginning of the 20th century. Anyone who paid attention in history class knows that the cruel First World War raged between 1914 and 1918. Although the industrial warfare and the targeted mass killing embodied a frightening image of technical progress, a millennia-old motif remained. The different parties insisted on denigrating their opponents as descendants of the devil. After the end of the war, the figure of the Antichrist was also taken up in anti-Semitic propaganda. As is well known, the Nazi regime saw the absolute evil in the Jewish people, which had to be destroyed at all costs. The crude claims were that the Jews were trying to subjugate the rest of the world through deceit and conspiracies. The annihilation of the allegedly devilish Judaism was therefore equated with the redemption of the Aryan race. This terrible worldview was conveyed to the general public in a variety of ways. Even Adolf Hitler, one of the cruelest, Joseph Goebbels, also shared these inhuman ideas. In his diary, he noted, "The Jew is probably the Antichrist of world history." Understandably, the other side represented a completely different picture. While many Nazis saw themselves as rightful saviors and warriors of God, the Nazi regime was often identified by its opponents as representing the Antichrist. Hitler, in particular, was suspected of embodying the devil's spawn. In 1941, the preacher Arnold Kuster gave a talk describing the 7 qualities of the Antichrist. The features presented matched very well with Adolf Hitler. The White Rose Resistance Group also took up this symbolism and called Hitler the messenger of the Antichrist in a leaflet. The concept of the Antichrist continues to captivate the imagination, especially in the United States, where fears of a false prophet are particularly pronounced. This heightened concern is fueled by the widespread presence of certain preachers in American media who reach large audiences with their interpretations of biblical prophecies. Among some clergy, there's a belief that the arrival of the Antichrist is imminent, while others suggest that the spirit of the Antichrist is already present in contemporary political and social developments. The erosion of national borders and the rise of surveillance, cashless transactions, and electronic data processing are viewed as ominous signs of an impending world government and the influence of the Antichrist. Modern interpretations of the Antichrist often intersect with conspiracy theories surrounding the New World Order, with some suggesting the development of microchips capable of mind control as a tool of nefarious control. While such technology is currently being developed for medical purposes, the potential for misuse raises concerns about its impact on individual autonomy and free thought. In this uncertain landscape, where reality often mirrors the dystopian visions of science fiction, the idea of the Antichrist serves as a lens through which to interpret and critique the evolving complexities of modern society. Whether we're interested in art or not, we've all seen Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. According to the Bible, the further course Jesus Christ took is well known. But what became of the 12 apostles? Who were they, and what unimaginably cruel deaths did they die? The 12 apostles. Before we go into detail about the individual apostles and their destinies, we should first answer a fundamental question. What is an apostle anyway? According to Christian tradition, these are the close companions of Jesus who were commissioned by the Savior to preach the faith. However, the distribution of the term apostle within the Bible is very uneven. While the term is used a total of 58 times in the letters of Paul, in the Gospel of Luke, and in the Acts of the Apostles, it only occurs once in the Gospel of Mark. In addition, the mention of the individual apostles does not paint a uniform picture. For example, in the Gospel of Luke, Judas, the son of James, is mentioned instead of Judas. Thus, Nathanael, mentioned in the Gospel of John, is also absent from the other Gospels. Basically, the list of 12 apostles includes the following people: Simon Peter, his brother Andrew, James the elder, Jesus' favorite disciple John, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus, Judas Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot. From a historical point of view, however, there is still debate as to whether Jesus really appointed a circle of 12 messengers of faith. In addition, we should not make the mistake at this point and equate the concept of apostle with that of the disciples in the New Testament. This generally means those people who followed Jesus during his lifetime. While the number is estimated in the thousands, this following, unlike the apostles, also included women such as Mary Magdalene, Martha of Bethany, and the sisters of Lazarus. After the resurrection, Jesus is said to have commissioned his disciples to proselytize other people. James the Greater and Peter, so much in advance, the information that the Gospels give us about the further career of the apostles is extremely sparse. In this regard, we only find it in the 12th chapter of Acts of the Apostles, more precisely in verses 1 to 4. It says, "About this time, King Herod laid hands on some of the congregation to mistreat them, but he killed James, John's brother, with a sword. And when he saw that it pleased the Jews, he went on and took Peter captive too." We also learned that after his captivity, Peter was delivered by an angel to the Lord. However, To understand the ultimate fate of the apostles, we need to look at the so-called Acts of Peter. This is an apocryphal Acts of the 2nd century, which is not a part of the official Bible canon. Sentenced to be crucified by the Romans, Peter is said to have insisted on not being put to death in the same way as his Lord and Redeemer. So he said to his tormentors, "I implore you, you executioners, crucify me with my head down and in no other way." The details surrounding the death of the Apostle Matthew remain shrouded in uncertainty and conflicting accounts. While some sources, like Hippias's letter, suggest that Matthew passed away peacefully in the town of Parthia, other records describe a more agonizing martyrdom in locations such as Ethiopia, Mesopotamia, or Persia. Moreover, the exact cause of his death is a matter of debate, with some sources mentioning burning or decapitation. Legend has it that the bones of Matthew were eventually transferred to CNO via Pessum in the 11th century, but the historical accuracy of this claim is uncertain. Additionally, while the Apostle Matthew has traditionally been identified as the author of the Gospel of Matthew since the 2nd century, modern scholars consider this attribution highly improbable. Andreas, he commanded that he should be scourged by 7 men and afterwards crucified, and commanded the executioners that his leg should not be pierced, and he should thus be hanged, for in this way he wished to torment him still more. The passage, which we read in the extra-canonical Acts of Matthew concerning the death of the anonymous apostle, shows that this messenger of the faith also died a cruel martyr's death, just like his brother Peter. Andrew is said to have refused to die in the same way as Jesus Christ. As a result, he was beaten to a special X-shaped cross. So, it came about that this construction with 2 diagonally running beams not only became known as St. Andrew's Cross, but was also considered a religious sign of identification in the early Christian period. Simon Zealots. Just like James, the son of Alphaeus, Simon Zealots is only mentioned in the list of the apostles. Regarding his death, Hippias's letter states that he died at the legendary old age of 120 years. Other sources paint a slightly different picture. According to them, the 120-year-old Simon Zealots did not die peacefully but was crucified. Other traditions locate his death in Caucasus, in Persia, or in England. There is also a reason why we see the apostle with a saw in the iconographic illustrations. His body is said to have been violently cut into 2. Judas, thus. In the case of thus, too, there are different death traditions. Some sources say that he died peacefully in Syria after a long life during which he converted many to the Christian faith. Other records testify that thus died a martyr's death, sometimes by the sword, sometimes by stoning, and sometimes by a cane. Thomas. In the apocryphal Acts of Thomas, we read about the death of Thomas, and when he prayed, he said to the soldiers, "Come and do the commands of him that sent you." And they 4 came and pierced him with their spears, and he fell down and died. This version appears with that presented in the Epistole of Hippias. This is where Thomas was killed in India with a pin spear, Judas Iscariot. In the New Testament, Judas Iscariot is the apostle who betrayed Jesus to the Romans and paved the way for the Savior's crucifixion. The Gospel of Matthew is the only one that depicts Judas as a repentant sinner. After Jesus had been condemned, accordingly, he returned the 30 pieces of silver he had received for his betrayal and then hanged himself. The situation is somewhat more drastic in the first chapter of the Acts of the Apostles. Judas bought a large field with his wages, but suffered an accident in which his body broke into 2 and his entrails spilled out. The mortal remains of Judas Iscariot are still said to be in that field of blood today, Turin's shroud. This is one of the most highly debated discoveries from Israel, but a lot of people believe that this item known as the Turin Shroud could be the cloth that Jesus of Nazareth was wrapped in after he was crucified. This shroud is one of the most well-known historical items that is associated with the Bible, and it was first discovered sometime around the 14th century. The cloth shows both the front and back of a man who looks an awful lot like Jesus of Nazareth. At the time, it was common for someone to be wrapped in a large cloth after they had passed away, yet no one knows what happened to the cloth Jesus was wrapped in after he arose from the dead. Most of these cloths would have remained on the bodies of those who passed away, eventually decaying alongside the body. However, the fact that this cloth even exists in the first place may serve as evidence that the story of Jesus of Nazareth and his rising from the dead may be true. However, the cloth has been called into question by many researchers and scientists who have analyzed it over the years. The cloth was investigated in the 1970s, with many researchers claiming it was a fake. However, upon closer inspection, the cloth used a sewing technique that perfectly aligned with the techniques that would have been used by the Israelites many years ago. However, contrary to this, in the 1980s, the cloth was examined using radiocarbon dating. We know that carbon dating is not incredibly accurate, but often if the system doesn't work, it will lead researchers to believe an item is much older than it really is. However, in this case, the results said the exact opposite, claiming that the cloth likely came from between the 13th and 14th centuries. Further analysis also claims that fragments of pigments were found on the cloth, confirming that the apparent bloodstains were not blood at all, but rather artificial pigments. This shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. Like a thin piece of cloth like this being discovered hundreds of years after Jesus' crucifixion would be highly unlikely. By all means, it seems a little bit too good to be true. And that seems to be the case. But either way, this was a very interesting discovery. Dead Sea Scrolls. Between 1947 and 1956, a series of scroll fragments were found in a cave system in the West Bank area. There were a total of 850 scrolls that were collected, now known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Most of the contents of the scrolls date back to biblical times, and much of the information in the scrolls refer to biblical history and biblical stories. Most of the scriptures found were written in Hebrew, but some were also written in Greek and Aramaic. They were dated between 250 BC and 70 AD, with some of these scrolls even referencing to religions other than Christianity. What is very interesting about the scrolls is that they tell the same story as can be found in most modern Bibles. The history, characters, and lessons are all identical, though some of these scrolls include a few additional texts or changes in wording. This is important because it shows how writers would have been able to add their own spin onto ancient biblical stories, calling a lot of translations into question, especially the King James translation, which is so popular today. The most important part of these scrolls is that it confirms many of the biblical stories that have been shared for hundreds of years. It also shows that some of these writers may have had agendas when they translated the ancient texts and how we must be careful who we get our information from. The story of Noah's flood is one of the best known and most fascinating stories in the Bible. While most scholars have interpreted the description of the Great Cataclysm as a purely symbolic account, there are a growing number of researchers who claim that the biblical deluge actually happened. As a result, more and more evidence is now coming to light showing that thousands of years ago, the earth was indeed struck by an unimaginable flood. Before we look more closely at the breathtaking background of the flood, we should first get a brief overview of the catastrophe described in the Bible. Genesis chapter 7 says, "And the Lord said to Noah, 'Go into the ark, you and all your household, because I have found you righteous. Take with you 7 of every clean animal, the male and his female, and a pair of each of the unclean animals, likewise of the birds of the air, 7 each, to keep offspring alive on all the earth. For 7 days from now, I will bring rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and will wipe out from the face of the earth every living thing that I have made. And Noah did everything that the Lord commanded him to do. But he was 600 years old when the flood came on the earth. We also learned that Noah went on board the ark with his family, that is, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives, and the animals. Puzzlingly enough, in the context of the flood, the mysterious 7 wise men are mentioned again and again who survived the flood and then laid the foundation for the new age of human civilization. But who were these figures, really? And what did they have to do with the construction of the first ancient temples and the Egyptian pyramids? Mystical temples. Exploring ancient mysteries often leads us to mystical temples, such as the Temple of Edfu in ancient Egypt, nestled between Luxor and Aswan, dating back to around 237 to 157 BC. This remarkable structure holds secrets etched into its walls. While many of these inscriptions remain fragmented, scholars believe they contain texts that delve into the origins of the cosmos. Within the intricate symbols adorning these temple walls, hidden messages are said to lurk, offering glimpses of historical truths that challenge conventional understanding. As researchers unravel the enigmatic messages inscribed within these ancient texts, they seek to illuminate a new perspective on the mysteries of the universe and the civilizations that once thrived within the shadows of these sacred structures. Representing that mystical temple that existed from the beginning of the world, this building is said to have served as a reminder and projection of divine origin. The 7 wise men. But what could have been meant by the beginning of the world? Did this designation actually refer to the birth of the earth, or rather to that age which was called Zipti in the ranks of the Egyptians? During this time of the first return, the gods are said to have lived side by side with humans on earth. The divine knowledge then revealed was said to have been collected by mortals in a sacred book, which also recorded the location of the sacred mountains. In addition, many ancient Egyptian temple inscriptions repeatedly refer to a group of 7 wise men. These were the only divine creatures who knew how to build temples and holy cities. Thus it was that the 7 sages oversaw the construction of these structures from the tops of the sacred mountains. Particularly interesting, the locations of those mountains are equated by some researchers with those of the magnificent pyramids. Though, who is the god of the moon in Egyptian mythology, is said to have been involved in the activities of the 7 wise men. Together, this alliance pushed forward countless monumental construction projects, including the monumental pyramids. Sensational finds. The problem, apart from the fact that their number was 7, today we know nothing more about this mysterious group. In order to draw back to the flood, we should not forget at this point that the catastrophe was by no means the only one documented in the Old Testament. The Samaritans, the Babylonians, and the Greeks, as well as many other peoples, also knew stories about dramatic floods that wiped out large parts of earthly life. Against this background, it seems reasonable to conclude that the deluge described in the Bible actually goes back to other, much older narratives. Let's take a look at the breathtaking discovery that the British archaeologist Austin Leard recorded in Assyria in 1849. Together with his team, he recovered around 25,000 uniform tablets which listed, among other things, the kings who ruled the country before and after the Great Flood. However, the archaeological treasure contained another, not entirely insignificant component, the world-famous Gilgamesh epic, the Gilgamesh flood. Interesting to know, this fact only became known more than 20 years after the original discovery. So in 1872, George Smith decided to decipher more parts of the now outdated collection of plates. Long story short, the story that is so famous today is about the eponymous King Gilgamesh of Uruk, who sets out for the ancestor of the human race in order to seek immortality there. The 11th panel, which bears the title, The Flood, is particularly exciting for us today. Asked by Gilgamesh why he is immortal unlike himself, Utnapishtim revealed the ancient secrets of a catastrophe long ago. If we look straight into the details of this tradition, it should be immediately clear to everyone why the biblical Noe variant is most likely just a modification of the Gilgamesh tablet. For the sake of completeness, however, it should be noted that the version of the tablet has not been preserved in its entirety, which is why its content was reconstructed from Sumerian, Babylonian, Akkadian, and some other fragments of tradition. The Ark of Ziusudra. The tale says that the god Enki warned a human named Ziusudra of an approaching flood catastrophe that would wipe out all life on Earth. To protect oneself from the flood, Enki advised Ziusudra to build a large ship as soon as possible after he had received the divine warning in a dream. He did not hesitate and immediately tore down his house in order to make the rescue ship out of its fragments. In doing so, he again obeyed the express command of the deity not to warn other people of the approaching danger. After the ship was completed, Ziusudra loaded onto it many animals, his wife, and the rest of his family. Later, as the waters of the flood gradually receded, Ziusudra and his wife were rewarded for saving sentient beings by being deified and invited to the fabled land of the blessed. The search for the origin. At this point, let's look further beyond the biblical box. In addition to the mythologies already mentioned, massive flood disasters were also described in numerous other cultures, including Hinduism, in the ancient Icelandic sagas, in the ranks of the Australian Aborigines, and in Chinese antiquity. In view of this equally lush and diverse source situation, is it really conceivable that all these stories should have a purely metaphorical character? Are we really just dealing with a myth that has been picked up and modified in different parts of the world? It is certain that many severe floods have indeed occurred on Earth over the millennia. In this regard, there's a theory that the sagas really do relate to real events, but dramatize them to the limitless. What we do know is that between the years 13,000 and 9,000 BC, parts of Asia and Europe experienced repeated so-called continental megafloods. Such incidents typically occur when ice reservoirs rupture, also volcanic eruptions, sea and earthquakes, and the inrush of water into the Black Sea are repeatedly discussed as causes of the deluge. On the other hand, no less exciting are the approaches that locate the background of the flood not on Earth, but in the proverbial heaven, or precisely in space. Alien trigger. The corresponding assumptions are based on the consequences of various meteorite and asteroid impacts. Accordingly, some time ago, a projectile from space crashed onto the Earth's surface, where it then set off an immense tidal wave. The approach put forward by the Austrian Otto Heinrich Muck is as adventurous as it is gripping. According to this, the asteroid would not only have triggered a flood catastrophe of biblical proportions, but also destroyed the legendary island kingdom of Atlantis. As part of his work, in which he analyzed numerous legends of the flood of different peoples, Muck came to the conclusion that the catastrophe must have taken place in 8498 BC. Noah's Ark and the importance of it in religion. Noah's Ark is one of the most widely discussed stories in world history. What makes the Ark particularly interesting is that it has not only been spoken of in the Christian Bible, but also in texts from Judaism and Islam. On top of this, The Samaritans, known as the people of Shinar, spoke of a great flood as well. By all means, this flood does seem to have taken place a few thousand years ago, but scientists and researchers have questioned the validity of these texts. Until now, many researchers wondered if a ship of this size and construction would have been able to survive a mass flood. Others also wonder how the ship could have been large enough to fit so many animals. However, experts are now convinced that the story is true after finding what they believe to be the remains of Noah's Ark in a mountain range in Turkey. Noah's Ark in the mountains of Ararat. Sometime around April of 2010, a team of Chinese researchers announced that they had just found the wreckage of Noah's Ark in the Turkish mountains of Ararat, just like the historical texts claimed. This 15-person team of researchers says they are 99.9% certain of their discovery, saying that the only possibility for these remains is that they would have belonged to Noah's Ark. The team researching the finding held a press conference and detailed how they found a scrap of wood and pieces of rope that likely would have been used on the Ark. They took extensive photos and videos from the wreckage and shared them with those around the world who tuned in to learn more about this discovery. A team of scientists from a Christian organization known as Noah's Ark Ministries International also claimed to have found a larger structure of the ship at around 4,000 meters above sea level in the mountains of Ar. To put that into perspective, the mountains are estimated to be about 500 meters high. The pieces of wood they found are said to be around 4,800 years old, which would perfectly fit in line with the stories told in the Book of Genesis, considering biblical history dictates the world is only around 6,000 years old. What makes this discovery so incredible is that the researchers found not only fragments of cypress wood, the exact wood that Noah was commanded to use, they also found evidence of the ship being divided off into several smaller segments. These segments closely resemble stables that would have been used to house the animals. According to the team of researchers, these stables would have been sized well enough to fit roughly 2 of most animals on Earth, including large mammals such as lions, bears, or elephants. The exact location of these findings is said to have been kept a secret by the Turkish government until further excavations could be made. However, there's a lot of speculation that these findings may not be genuine. According to several scientists and researchers, a find like this would not be plausible considering the amount of time that has passed since the Ark would have struck land. Some scientists also reject the idea that Noah's Ark ever existed in the first place. However, this theory seems incredibly unlikely, considering how many eyewitness testimonies have been given over the years, and how many ancient civilizations could have directly descended from Noah's family, and all of them claimed that the flood did, in fact, take place. All of this aside, there are a few key pieces of information that could disprove this discovery. According to a few scientists, a Kurdish mountain guide may have been spotted hauling a large amount of wood up to the top of the mountain range. He had supposedly been doing this in an effort to build fragments of a ship at the top of the mountains. He would have also melted snow and let the wood age for a while, giving the illusion that it had been recently uncovered after being trapped under ice for many years. These claims have never been proven, but it is certainly possible that this discovery could have been created by a shill who's looking to scam people out of money in exchange for guiding them up the mountain. Some researchers who do believe the story of Noah's Ark to be genuine also debate that the Ark would have been found so high on the mountain. According to these scientists, if the story is true, it's almost impossible that the water levels would have risen high enough for the Ark to reach more than 4,000 meters above sea level. According to the researchers, there simply isn't enough water in the world to take a boat so high. The question of whether the biblical deluge truly happened is a complex one that involves historical, geological, and archaeological perspectives. While the flood narrative in the Bible is a prominent and significant aspect of many religious traditions, determining its historical accuracy is challenging due to limited empirical evidence and the symbolic nature of religious texts. From a scientific standpoint, there is ongoing debate and investigation into the possibility of large-scale flooding events in various regions throughout history, including the Mesopotamian region where the biblical story is set. Geological evidence, such as sedimentary layers and ancient flood deposits, has been interpreted by some researchers as potential indicators of catastrophic flooding events in antiquity. However, the extent and timing of such events and their correlation with the biblical narrative remain subjects of scholarly inquiry and interpretation. Moreover, the flood stories found in various cultures and traditions around the world, raising questions about its universality and origins. Ultimately, whether the biblical deluge described in the Bible really happened is a matter of personal belief, interpretation, and faith. As with many aspects of religious texts, individuals might approach the flood narrative from a variety of perspectives, including literal, allegorical, or symbolic interpretations.